Alright guys, I'm back here today with the second video of Chapter 40 and kind of expanding on the feedback systems that we discussed at the end of the last video, or kind of a little bit throughout the last video. I'm going to walk you through a couple of feedback systems that we actually see in our body, and the examples I'm taking are actually from Chapter 45 if you wanted to go check those out and maybe read up a little bit more on them. Those are from the endocrine system. And specifically, we're going to talk about the thyroid gland and the pancreas, okay? And these two things are relatively important for normal functioning of the human. The pancreas, we know of some issues with the pancreas, and we know, some people, maybe you even are in your lives, have had issues with their thyroid. So I think it would be pertinent to talk about those in terms of the feedback systems that they work by, okay? All right, so let's get on here if I can. There we go. Back one. All right, so the thyroid is an organ that is in your throat. It actually kind of wraps around your trachea, as you see kind of in this picture here. This gland, you kind of take it for granted. You don't realize it's there, but it is right here. You probably can't even feel it unless there's something wrong with it. Okay, usually if there's something wrong with it, it gets swollen or bigger, and then you can definitely tell when it's there. But it's kind of nestled in between your neck muscles here and your trachea, and it kind of wraps around your trachea. Embedded in the thyroid gland is a type of gland called the parathyroid gland, and it's actually not necessarily one thing. It's actually four little nodules that are broken apart, and they would kind of wind up like almost in each quadrant of your little thyroid here. So it'd be like one here, one here, one here, and one here. So the thyroid and the parathyroid actually kind of work together to regulate different parts or different set levels of chemicals in your body. Okay, so we're going to talk about what this organ does, what this gland actually does. First thing we're going to talk about in terms of what it does is how it regulates your body's calcium levels. Okay. The body's calcium levels fluctuate. You probably know that, and it depends on how much calcium you take in a given period. But what you see in front of you on this slide here is, in words, what your thyroid does to help regulate body calcium. Okay, you can come back here and look at this and read it all you want, but I prefer to talk about it when we look at this diagram right here. Okay. Now this system is a negative feedback system, and like most of these you're going to see today in the body are actually negative feedback systems, okay? And so this one, this diagram here, you've seen one kind of like it before. I've actually seen a couple of them in the previous video. This diagram kind of illustrates what happens when blood calcium levels either raise or lower, okay? So we look right here. I'm going to go ahead and take a snapshot of this one so that I can draw on it. And it'll pop up there. All right, so we see right at the center here, that is our control center. Remember, the control center, name of the control center is the hypothalamus in our brain. And the hypothalamus kind of looks at the blood, okay? Blood passes through it, looks at the blood, and measures how much calcium is in that blood. And it likes the blood calcium levels to be about 10 milligrams per 100 mils of fluid that pass through it. So it's got little receptors in its cells that can tell whether or not that is what it is. It'll look for calcium. If there's enough calcium there, then it won't do anything. But if calcium levels rise, okay, let's pretend you and your friends do the gallon milk challenge. Now, if we were in class, I'm not going to do this here because it's kind of a waste of the gigabytes in memory that I've got to put into the video. But if you want to watch, I'll see if I can throw it on there. You just have to ask me again. That's one of those ask me things. But if we were in person, we would watch some idiot he's like a super bro. He's not idiot, he's probably a millionaire, but some super bro guy, he chugs an entire gallon of milk in like less than 5 minutes and then throws up everywhere. It's great. But anyway, you could imagine if he keeps that gallon of milk down, his blood calcium levels would rise, okay? And as a result, you would see that the hypothalamus says, oh, this dummy just drank a whole gallon of milk. Uh-oh, we got to deal with all the extra calcium that's going to come rushing into the bloodstream as a result. So we have rising blood calcium levels because we drank an entire gallon of milk in 5 minutes and somehow kept it down. This guy didn't. He threw it up everywhere. And your brain is going to tell the thyroid, which we see right here, a little butterfly-looking gland, to release something. I just wrote right over it. To release a chemical called calcitonin. Calcitonin right there, okay? So the thyroid gland, when we have too much calcium in our blood, will release a chemical called calcitonin. And so calcitonin, as we see here, will have an effect in two different spots. Calcitonin is a message that will tell kidney cells to reduce calcium uptake, okay, in your kidneys. And so what your kidneys are good at doing is retaking or reclaiming materials that would otherwise be dumped into the toilet, okay? So a lot of the times your kidneys are going to keep calcium because the body can use it, right? But if the body has a ton of calcium already because you just drank a gallon of milk, this calcitonin will tell the kidneys, hey, we don't need all that calcium, so quit taking it up. We'll just let it go in the toilet. It's fine, okay? Calcitonin will also communicate with bone cells. Contrary to what you might believe, bones are made of cells and they are live. It's only when we die and let our bones dry out in the sun where they become all hard and gross like that. But they are living tissue. And calcitonin will communicate with the bones, the cells in the bones, and it will say, all right, cells and bones, you need to start taking more calcium in, okay? So calcium will now be deposited into the bones as a result of extra calcium in the blood, okay? And that's you've heard that since you were a little kid. Milk is good for your bones, and that's one of the things that does it. When you have extra calcium in your body, the thyroid gland releases calcitonin, which tells your bones to take more of that calcium up, okay? Now, both of these things right here, if we're dumping more calcium into the toilet, we've told our kidneys we're not going to take that up, and we're putting more calcium into the bones, theoretically, we should, by the time this has run its course, we should see blood calcium levels decline, right? So maybe we got them up to 13 milligrams per 100 mils here, and by the time we got through depositing some calcium and urinating it into the toilet, it went back down to 10 milligrams, okay? And so here's where the negative feedback comes in. That blood is red again in the hypothalamus, and then this system will shut off, okay? So that is how we would deal with rising blood calcium levels. We can also kind of do something if we see falling blood calcium levels, okay? So let's say hypothalamus reads that our blood is at 8 milligrams instead of 10 per 100 mils of fluid, okay? That would indicate to the hypothalamus, the brain, that your blood calcium levels are in fact falling. In this case, the brain is going to send a message to not the thyroid this time, but the parathyroid glands. And we can see those little parathyroids here. I'll kind of color them in red so they stand out a little bit better. Just almost like little nodules that find themselves right in the middle of your thyroid gland. So they kind of are in the same spot. They're different tissue, but they kind of work together, right? And so the brain sends a message to the parathyroid gland, and the parathyroid glands will release, oddly enough, parathyroid hormone. That's what PTH is, okay? Now, PTH is a chemical that will be sent to the bones and also the kidneys again here, okay? And even kind of the intestines in some respect. But what it's going to do is kind of the opposite of what calcitonin did. Parathyroid hormone will tell the bones, all right, we're really low on calcium. We need to release some of that calcium that we've been storing up all this time, and we need to put it back in the bloodstream so the body can use it for what it needs, okay? And the same thing with the kidneys, okay? I mentioned that the kidneys like to retake things, that are going to be dumped in the toilet. Your kidneys now are going to be told by PTH to increase their uptake of calcium. We're going to take more calcium back from the blood before it goes into the toilet so that we can use it for whatever we need it for, okay? And this kind of goes along with what we see in the intestines. Anything you might eat that might have calcium in it, it will tell the intestines to increase the uptake of calcium as well, making sure that we get more of that calcium into the cells that line your intestines, and that ultimately gets into your bloodstream as well. Okay, so these types of things here, gathering calcium from the bones, making sure that the kidneys grab more calcium before it exits into the toilet. All of this stuff works to increase the calcium levels in the blood, as we see kind of right here, increase the calcium levels in the blood back to the set point, and maybe we raise that back to 10 milligrams because of the actions that parathyroid hormone has allowed us to achieve. Okay, so other things that you can do here, like for instance, this one here, these are things that your body does, subconsciously. You don't tell your body to do that; it just does it. Okay, but your body also does sometimes tell you messages to, change your behavior. There are definitely times where I crave milk, absolutely crave milk. I will chug, a quarter of a gallon of milk in 30 seconds. I'll just sit there, I'll eat a couple Oreos, and then I'll hammer the milk. I don't know what it is, but I just absolutely crave it. And I'm guessing that my blood calcium levels have fallen, and my hypothalamus realizes it, and it's telling me, hey, you'd like some milk, go chug it out of the thing. And so I do. I follow my brain's orders, and I go chug some milk, and I'm happy afterwards, okay? So that is how your blood calcium level is controlled, and it is by negative feedback, okay? Same thing here. I kind of neglected to mention this, but this one here, you get this product or this event that occurs where your body takes back some of the calcium, and because it has taken back some of the calcium added to it, it is a negative feedback control system where it tells the brain, okay, we've got everything we need, let's shut down this system. We don't need to continually take over this stuff, okay? So both of these sides of the coin are, in fact, negative feedback systems. Okay, the thyroid also does some other really important stuff. It actually, in addition to releasing calcitonin and parathyroid hormone, it releases these other types of molecules called T3 and T4. And those of you out there who do have thyroid problems or issues, these probably sound familiar. Your doctor has probably mentioned these things before, and you might take a medicine that sounds very similar to one of these two things that you see here as well. But T3 and T4 are the chemicals that the thyroid releases to maintain your blood pressure, okay? Maintain your, where's my cursor? There it is. Maintain your blood pressure, maintain normal heart rate, maintain normal muscle tone, digestion, reproductive functions. That's a lot of stuff. So those are pretty important chemicals, and your body produces those in just the right amounts most often, and that's why you generally feel good. But those of us, not us, I don't have these issues as far as I know, those people who have issues with their thyroid creating these, they feel the effects of low or high blood pressure or low or high heart rate or low or high muscle tone, those types of things. They feel those effects, okay? So too much or too little T3, T4 can result in actually serious metabolic disorders. Now, one of the things that I want to make sure that you understand about this, because I'm going to use it to illustrate a positive feedback mechanism or positive feedback loop that has some side effects and some bad effects on the human body, is because of what these chemicals are made of. If you look at the name of this one here, it says triiodothyronine, okay? That name tells us that there is iodine in this chemical, T3, okay? Triiodothyronine. I'm going to let you guess. You can pause the video if you want. I'm going to let you guess how many iodines are in this particular molecule. If you said 3, you are right. It is 3 iodines that are in that particular molecule. And I'll let you guess how many iodines are in this one. Yep, you're right. It's 4. Okay, it doesn't have that. It doesn't have like quadiiodothyronine or something like that. They named it something different. But this 4 here for T4 tells us it's got 4 iodines. Okay, and so one of the things that we see that affects people who have issues with their thyroid is something called a goiter. Okay, and so this is kind of a shocking picture here. But a goiter, you can kind of see this person right here, is basically an enlarging of the thyroid because they don't have iodine. Okay, and we don't really see this in developed countries very often, and I'll let you guess as to the reason why. It has to do with our food. Okay? There's a certain food that we really like, especially as Americans, that allows us to get as much iodine as we need without really like having to take iodine pills or something like that. And I'll let you, to pause it, see if you can't figure out what that food is. It is iodized salt. Okay, iodized salt, we eat a lot of it. It provides just enough iodine to make enough T3 and T4 that we don't get this goiter. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the normal negative feedback control system that governs the T3 and T4 and governs our thyroid and how it works. And then I'm going to talk about what happens when that system is broken. It reverts or changes almost to a positive feedback system, okay, which causes this goiter. All right, so let's look at that picture here. This picture here illustrates negative feedback regulation of T3 and T4 from the thyroid gland. And so you kind of have to follow me here on how this works, all right? I'm going to take a snapshot of it again and try to draw all over it if that works. All right, so let's talk about normal functioning of the thyroid as it pertains to releasing T3 and T4, and then what the release of T3 and T4 does to this system, okay? So under normal circumstances, your hypothalamus, this is again in your brain, hypothalamus in the brain, is going to want to release T3 and T4, okay? It wants to regulate all those body functions that I had mentioned in one of the previous slides, okay? We don't need to get into specifics as to why or how that's going to work. All we want to know is that it's going to release those things, okay? So what the hypothalamus does, and you don't need to know super specifics about this. Don't spend a lot of time remembering thyroid releasing hormone and the anterior pituitary. You shouldn't need to know those types of things, okay? But it's always nice to know them in context. So the hypothalamus, if it wants to turn on the thyroid, which is going to be the goal in this case, and make T3 and T4 down at the bottom, it's going to send a chemical message called a hormone called thyroid releasing hormone. That's TRH, okay? It's going to send that little hormone to a little gland that is called the anterior pituitary gland, and you'll notice that it's right here. It's this one here. It's just below the hypothalamus. So it sends it through some ducts to the anterior pituitary, and it says, okay, we need to turn on the thyroid gland. So anterior pituitary, this guy right here, is going to release thyroid stimulating hormone, and that's going to be important. What do you think thyroid stimulating hormone does? If you said stimulates the hormone, the thyroid, you were right, okay? So thyroid stimulating hormone then goes directly to the thyroid gland, okay? And it goes directly to the thyroid gland, and what do you think it stimulates the thyroid to do? If you said it stimulates the thyroid to release T3 and T4, you are correct, okay? So TSH is going to be received by the thyroid. The thyroid cells are going to perceive it, and then they're going to make and release T3 and T4 as a result, okay, into the bloodstream. Now, this is great, right, because T3 and T4, we know, regulate some of our normal body functions, make sure that we have proper blood pressure and all that stuff, right? But too much T3 and too much T4 can be bad, okay? Too much T3, T4 can produce other symptoms called Graves' syndrome, okay? I think is what they call it, Graves' disease, where your eyes kind of bulge out of your head. You've got too much of this stuff, and you don't need it. So we want to have a proper way to shut off the production of the thyroid. We want to make sure we can stop this stuff being formed here, because too much of a good thing can sometimes be bad, right? And so we want to be able to shut it off. Now, this is a very stereotypical negative feedback system, okay? The product of this pathway, T3 and T4 that we see down here, will literally feed back into this system at some point. Okay, so T4 we can see feeds back into the hypothalamus. And there will be some kind of interaction. This will be like a ligand, right? This will be like a signal to these cells of the hypothalamus that say, all right, cells of the hypothalamus, we've got enough T4, we need you to shut her down, okay? So T4 will feed back to the hypothalamus, communicate that message and say, we're done, we don't need any T4. The hypothalamus will stop producing TRH, okay? If the hypothalamus stops producing TRH, it doesn't get sent to the anterior pituitary, and as a result, TSH will not be made. If TSH is not made, the thyroid does not get stimulated, we stop producing T4. Makes sense, right? That's an easy one to understand, okay? So that's how that negative feedback control loop works, all right? So we took care of understanding how T4 works. It shuts down the hypothalamus, shuts down TRH, everything else after it gets shut down as well. Let's look at T3, the workings of T3. It works very similarly, only it feeds back into the anterior pituitary, okay? So it'll go to this gland right here, and it will communicate with the cells of that gland and say, okay, anterior pituitary, I don't care what the hypothalamus is telling you, we've got too much T3, we need to shut her down. And so the anterior pituitary will then stop producing TSH. If we have no more chemical that stimulates the thyroid does not get stimulated, and we don't make T3, okay? So this is your very stereotypical negative feedback loop, where the product feeds back into the system somewhere and shuts it down, okay? So erase all ink, good. Let's talk about what happens when this goes haywire or goes awry, okay? Let's think of somebody like the picture we just saw of the woman with the thing on her neck, okay? And what that is, that's an enlarged thyroid, okay? And let's think about what happens when her body wants to try and make T3 and T4, all right? Normally, it would do just like we said. Her body would release, her hypothalamus would release TRH. TRH would tell the anterior pituitary to release TSH, and then TSH is going to stimulate the thyroid. Awesome, right? Now, theoretically, if she had enough iodine to make T3 and T4, she would make it, okay? But what have we said that she doesn't have enough of? She does not have enough iodine in her body. She doesn't eat enough of it in her diet. She just doesn't have it, okay? And so you need T3 and iodine to make T3 and T4, or else you don't make it. If you don't have the product, you don't make if you don't have the building blocks, you don't make the product, okay? If I want to build myself a house and I don't have any wood, can I build a house? No. It's the same thing here. If your body doesn't have the iodine, it can't make these things, okay? So even though her body is telling her to make these things, okay, she can't, okay? And if she can't make these things, if she can't make T3 and T4, they cannot feed back into the system. Okay? T3 cannot feed back to the anterior pituitary. It just can't happen. If they're not there, if they're not being made, they can't feed back. So what you see here is a runaway kind of positive feedback loop. Okay? The body is expecting and hoping that T3 and T4 will feed back to the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary to help shut this system down. But it doesn't get that information. And as a result, this pathway continues to happen over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. We have continuous thyroid stimulating hormone continuously stimulating the thyroid in an attempt to make T3 and T4. What TSH doesn't know, and what the anterior pituitary doesn't know, is that there's no iodine to make T3 and T4 to shut down the system. So it's going to continue to just stimulate. And the cells of the of the thyroid as a result of this stimulation become enlarged. Okay, and so it's just this kind of positive feedback loop that continuously stimulates the thyroid in an attempt to get this T3 and T4, which it can't get. Now, this is luckily this woman here that we saw in the previous picture. Her situation can be remedied. Her situation is not deadly, okay? She can take some T3 and T4 type pills, and that thing will shrink, okay? So it's kind of a neat look into the same system that can, when it's broken, it can turn into a nasty positive feedback loop, but when it's working properly is a negative feedback inhibition system, okay? All right, let's talk briefly about the pancreas. Okay, the pancreas, again, well known, widely known, and this is one I'm using because people know it, is responsible for regulating blood sugar levels. Okay, so the blood sugar levels that we see here are regulated by this organ, which is kind of tucked up under the liver and just behind the stomach. Okay, it's kind of buried in there. And your pancreas releases insulin and glucagon. Okay, again, I'll let you kind of look at this picture here and read about that if you'd like. I'm not going to worry about reading it. I'm going to spend more time here on this diagram, okay? Because I think you'll learn more from this diagram than anything else, okay? So we can walk through this. Again, this is a negative feedback loop. The product of the cycle or the product of the system will feed back to the brain and tell it to shut the thing down, okay? Now, I would like you to know the specifics of this just basically because it's a very common issue that we see in our society, and I think it's something that you probably should know if you don't already. Okay, so I'm not gonna draw on this one. I'm just gonna use the pointer here with my come on now. Oh, bugger. Okay, let me go back in here. Or not. I'll just go with this one then. It won't let me get back into the thing, but that's okay. So your brain here in the hypothalamus is going to read whether or not your blood glucose levels are too low or too high. So let's say it's Halloween and you just rifled through your entire candy bag, right? So that's going to send a signal to your pancreas. The brain is going to send a signal to your pancreas as I see this knucklehead ate every piece of candy in the bag and hasn't thrown it up yet. So we got to deal with all the extra sugar that's there. Okay, so the brain realizes that the set point is much higher than it should be, and it will send a chemical message to a chemical or electric, I think it's chemical message to the pancreas. And then the pancreas, as a result, is going to produce insulin, okay? And specifically the beta cells of the pancreas are going to secrete this insulin. And this tends to be the problem with people who are diabetic. Okay, so the insulin is a chemical message that goes to the body cells. And the cells of the body are told, all right, all this candy was just eaten. We need to store this sugar. Okay, so the body cells, when they receive this insulin message, are going to take in more sugar than they would otherwise, okay? And also, this insulin goes to the liver, okay? This message goes to the liver, tells the cells of the liver, okay, let's take up more glucose and store it. We're going to store it as this sugar storage molecule that all the students knew back in Chapter 5 was called glycogen, okay? So as a result of these things, if you got body cells that are taking more sugar in than they normally would and liver cells storing extra sugar, you are theoretically taking that sugar out of the bloodstream, right? So the blood glucose levels should drop, okay? As a result of this, the message sent back to the brain is that the blood glucose levels have dropped, so we're going to stop the stimulus, stop the message to the pancreas to lower the blood glucose, so it's a negative feedback loop. And the other side, if you guys have ever experienced low blood sugar, where you kind of feel lightheaded and you don't feel right, and then you eat a candy bar, and 5 minutes later you feel fine. Okay, that is your body telling you that you're low on blood glucose, and so you should get more. And so it's telling you this kind of behavioral thing. But it also does this stuff subconsciously as well. So your brain recognizes that, all right, you're really low on blood sugar. Let's go ahead and get you some excess blood sugar from places that we've stored it, okay? And so the brain is going to send this message again to the pancreas, only this time the alpha cells of the pancreas are going to respond to this particular message, and the alpha cells of the pancreas are going to release something called glucagon, okay? And glucagon is a chemical message that is sent to the liver, and the liver is going to perceive that message, and it's going to say, okay, we are going to break apart all of the sugar stored as glycogen, and we're going to turn it into the little subunits, the little monomers called glucose. And so the glucose gets released into the bloodstream. So if you have all this extra glucose being released into the bloodstream from the liver, and you eat a candy bar, theoretically your blood glucose levels should rise, and they do. And when they do, it tells your brain, okay, we're back to the normal set limit. We can shut down the system, stop sending a message to the pancreas so that we can stop releasing glucose into the blood. Okay? Kind of a nice system. All right, and obviously it's not letting me click on anything. So the next two slides in the series actually talk about diabetes. And basically what diabetes is a breakdown in this chemical message system. Number one, type 1 diabetics, they both deal with insulin reception. Type 1 diabetics don't produce insulin. So they don't produce the chemical message that tells the body cells to take up glucose or the liver cells to take up glucose. So people who are diabetic as a result of that just pass their sugar into the urine. It gets filtered out into the urine. And so they need to take insulin shots to get their insulin, what's the word I'm looking for? Synthetically, if you want to call it that, even though it's not necessarily synthetic. Type 2 diabetics have decreased responsiveness of their cells to insulin. Okay, so they still create insulin, and they still have the receptors on their cells that kind of read the insulin message, but the receptors don't receive that message because it's like you've been beat in the face a bunch of times. It's like if you've ever seen a Rocky movie, if you haven't, go out and see one. Rocky gets punched in the face relentlessly over and over and over again, and by the end of the movie you're like, can he even feel it? That's kind of what type 2 diabetics experience. They eat terrible food oftentimes. They eat sugar all the time, and their cells are constantly barraged with insulin, saying, hey, take this up, take this up, take this up. And by the time the receptors are just like, I'm sick of it, I'm done, I'm not going to respond to the insulin anymore. And so that's what happens with type 2 diabetes, okay? And so the reason I wanted to share that, not necessarily so you know about diabetes, but know that it is a breakdown in the chemical message system that we talked about in Chapter 11. Kind of a neat application to everything that we've talked about here. All right, guys, that'll be it for Chapter 40. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll talk to you soon.